The United States is losing the competition with China.
国外最大的视频网站油管上叫杰马丁秀的美国博主发布了一条名为“中国还是美国会先崩溃”的视频。视频中，主持人杰马丁和美国著名经济学家、马萨诸塞大学教授查德·沃尔夫探讨关于中美之间的竞争谁会获得胜利。整个视频1个多小时，小编将重点讨论内容进行分段剪辑。视频刚开始，主持人杰马丁就问教授，很多人会推测中美两国间的竞争结果。对于这个问题，教授怎么看待？
Over the last 30 to 40 years, we've been witnessing an absolutely unique phenomena. The People's Republic of China, whatever you think about it, and I'm not really here neither to condemn nor to endorse anything about it, but if you have eyes to see, you will see economic development achieving things nobody thought, nobody understood in those days what the Chinese were doing. They were one of many very poor countries in the world who were trying to stop being poor countries in the world. In the last 30 to 40 years, the Chinese achieved a level of economic development that took several centuries in Western Europe. And it took a good century and a half if your measuring rod is economic growth, lifting people out of poverty. And let's remember, 1.4 billion people, 4 to 5 times the population of the United States. They were able to do it. Not only that, they now compete with the United States at the highest levels of technology. What we get from Intel or Apple or, any of the, they have their equivalent. And in some cases, they're already ahead of us. I'll give you an example. 10 or 15 years ago, every major car producing company in the world undertook a program to develop the electric car, the electric vehicle, to replace the fossil fuel burning oil and gas vehicle. Okay, everybody did that. And we have many examples of that being produced. However, one example outranks everybody else. The electric cars of China are better and cheaper than anybody else's. They won the competition. That happens all the time. Just other companies in other countries at other times won equivalent competitions. The response of the United States has been to impose a tariff.
沃尔夫教授根据拜登政府征收关税说了一系列的例子，很长。小编总结一下，在同级竞争中，中国远远超越了其他国家，赢得了比赛。而美国的措施就是针对中国的电动汽车征收100%关税，中国人1分钱也不少挣，而美国的平民需要多花1倍的价钱购买车辆。而现在欧洲包括美国上路的电动汽车有1/4都来自中国比亚迪，而且这个速度还在增长。美国加征关税的举措是非常愚蠢的，因为美国所有行业的竞争对手都可以用原价买到物美价廉的电动汽车，而美国需要以多1倍的价格购买，中国也没有任何损失，因为中国是世界上最大的工业出口国，美国不可以没有中国，但是中国可以舍弃掉美国，这在竞争中已经落入绝对的下风。顺便吐槽一句，老外在说明的问题的时候举的例子非常啰嗦，一句话可以说完的事情，非得花100句润色一下。
The United States is losing the competition with China. I could give you many more examples if you wish. This is a self-defeating behavior, typically of somebody who's desperate. Instead of outcompeting the Chinese, coming up with a plan to try at least to do that, they tell themselves in Washington that they're isolating the Chinese. They're not. They're isolating themselves. And the rest of the world is watching in bemused. The rest of the world looking at the United States, and they see an empire going down. And they get the pleasure that comes from that. And we ought to wake up as a nation and figure this out.
About the rapid acceleration of Chinese development, you referenced what the Chinese economy has been able to accomplish in a much quicker time than we saw in the West, than we ever saw in Europe. And then because they were starting from such a low base, I mean, this is coming out of the century of humiliation in China. The country had been devastated. A lot of folks in the West don't know, but when America was fighting its civil war and 600,000 people died, China was fighting their civil war and 20 to 30 million people died. It was a scale that's very difficult to wrap our minds around and how devastating and violent that war was. But that's the era that China was coming out of, right? And so it's a very low base, which can make growth look a lot faster. Now, I'm not like taking anything away from the progress and advancements of the Chinese economy, but I wonder if that provides any valuable context. Richard, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. That is the pattern. But I have to tell you, as an economist, every part of the poor world, and the poor world is the vast majority of Asia, Africa, Latin America, for sure, plus large parts of North America and Europe too. But let's talk about Asia, Africa, Latin America. Vast majority of the people's world, the majority of the people's resources. They are all terribly poor. They all wanted 40 years ago to do something, but the Chinese actually did it. That's the question that has to be asked. Did they build on what went before? Absolutely. Absolutely they did. The Chinese, for example, and this is misrepresented in the West, again, for defensive reasons, which I understand. I even empathize. People say that the Chinese built on the West's technology. That's true. Of course that's true. But the Chinese didn't do that in any mysterious way. 25 years ago, they made a decision that they would say to the developed world whom they hoped to imitate, the United States, Western Europe, Japan, and so on. We will give you a deal. We understand you're capitalists. We understand that profit is the bottom line, blah, blah, blah. And here's what we're going to give you. Two things. Number one, an educated, disciplined, incredibly cheap labor force. And number two, the biggest growing market in the world. Look, I'm a professor of economics. I've taught in business schools on and off all my life. In a business school, we tell budding young entrepreneurs, if you want to know where to go and focus your energy, go where the labor is cheap and the market is growing. Okay. They went to China. And they went because they did exactly what we told them to do. They made a ton of money. That forced all of those who were not yet ready to do that to realize if you don't go to China too, these guys are going to outcompete you. They're going to bring that stuff back, made with cheaper labor, and they have the Chinese market. You know, General Motors now sells more cars in China than it does in the United States. These are the developments, and everybody wanted to do it. But the Chinese did it. And by the way, I don't mean to single them out so much. The Indians, by that I mean the people in the country called India, the Indians, they are doing a version of it. Not the version the Chinese, and they can't quite match the Chinese yet, but they are. And the whole organization called the BRICS is an organization that is internationalizing the Chinese model. And that too ought to worry the United States a great deal more than it currently does.